Hey guys, Ross W here, and today I'm going to be going over a couple Nightblade builds. Um, well, it's kind of one, but I've made two setups, one for ad pools and one for bosses. I just want to say as well, before anything, like I'm going to be back to uploading, so this will be the first of many. So if you enjoyed build videos and maybe even like some tutorials and like dungeon run type stuff, then stick around and feel free to like, subscribe, and all of that. And as I always say, this build is not set in stone. If you want to change things, change things. But this is what I use, and I've tried to make it as like beginner friendly as possible, while also maintaining like high damage and just what you want towards end game content. But obviously, as I say, if you want to change anything, change some things. So yeah, so I'm going to start off with the basics. So we've got 64 points into stamina. We are using the Thief Mundus Stone, and we are a Dark Elf for this build. You can use other races if you prefer, like Khajiit can work, and if you're really struggling with sustain or just prefer, you know, other looks of characters, you can use a Wood Elf as well, but Dark Elf is the best, in my opinion, for damage, and yeah, that's what we've gone for. So yeah. For food, we are gonna be using dubious personally, just because it gives you some health, it gives you stam recovery. For passing, obviously use lava foot because it just gives you way more sustain and it will just help you out for that. You can use max stat food as well if you have enough sustain. You can use max stat, which I'd recommend using the one that gives you max health and max stam. Same for passing, you can use max stam and push out slightly more damage, but it's up to you. Potions, for the most part, I use alliance pots just because they're easy to get. You can farm in Cyrodiil and buy a bunch of these, and they're just good to have. So that's what I'd recommend. You can use these pots if you drop certain skills, but you need to have prophecy and stuff to be able to actually use these and keep the buffs that you have. So usually just go for alliance pots. They're usually the easiest ones, or if you can craft certain pots, like weapon power pots, if you can craft these, then go for it. But if you're looking for pots that you don't have to craft, go for alliance pots. All right, next we're gonna go through the skills. Now, this is gonna be for the single target specifically. So we're using debilitate, we're using merciless resolve. You can use the other morph, which I would recommend in most content. However, this is also good as well because it gives you the heal. So if you want the heal, go for this morph. If you want the other morph, which is stamina based, then use that. Both are good. Personally, I usually just keep this one on for the heal and stuff in content, but you don't necessarily need that. We're using shadowy disguise, um, because we are a vampire as well, which I will get into soon. But shadowy disguise, really nice buff. It's giving you that extra damage done by 15%, which is huge. So we're using that. As our main spammable, we're using surprise attack, which is just really nice, and every third hit is a crit, basically. We're using Killer's Blade. This is our execute. You probably want to start casting this around 35%, but really good for damage. And then our ultimate, we're using Incap, which is self-explanatory. You want to use this especially in off-balance windows if you can line it up that way. Um, but yeah, really important to use this when you get it. You don't want to like save up too much after you get enough to cast this. It's really cheap at 72, so just try and cast this as much as you can. And the one thing I will also mention is some stuff to do with passing towards the end of this. So yeah, on the back bar, we're using Dark Shade. just keep this up. Carve, you can swap this out for other things like caltrops, but personally, I feel like carve for bosses isn't too bad because when you stack it up to 3 times, it can last 32 seconds, which means you don't have to reapply it for basically half a minute. So it means you can get in more surprise attacks, which, yeah, I know some people don't like carve, but personally, I think it's good for the style of play of a Nightblade. So, yeah, we've got Barb Trap, self-explanatory. This is usually on most builds, gives you minor force. Um, yeah, it's just good. And just one side note, which I will just mention, is try and cast this before it falls off by 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds if you can, because this takes 1.5 seconds to actually proc. So you want to cast it before it falls off if you want to have 100% uptime. Next, we have Stampede, and this is on our bar because it's applying our two-handed buffs and stuff like that. Lastly, we have Resolving Vigor. This is your self heal. For the most part, you'll probably just have this on. You can swap this for other things if you want in content. And then finally, we've got Incap again, mostly for the passives. And yeah, you can put Shooting Star here. However, I do not have that, as I'm low CP on the server that I have this, so I'm using Incap. But for single target, you're realistically only going to be using Incap anyway. So I'd probably just keep that on for the single target build. Right, quickly going over passives. So we are a pure Nightblade, and we're going to be taking like all the passives here. So take all the passives because you might as well. We're not subclass, so we're going to be taking class masteries, which we're using an eye for I can't even say that word. An eye for exploitation. We're we're now taking above and beyond as the second. These are just really good. I won't go into too much detail, but this basically gives us similar to a bloodthirsty effect, and then this basically just increases our crit caps. So both just really good ones to take. Next, I'm just going to go over one thing. As I mentioned earlier, we are a vampire, and we are specifically stage 2, so we can pick up this passive. And what this passive is doing is whenever we leave invisibility, so whenever we use shadowy disguise, for example, we are getting 300 weapon spell damage for 6 seconds, which is really nice, just buffs up our damage. You can use stuff like Mistform, however, obviously due to the way that this works, this dashes you forward, so like it can be a bit awkward to use. So I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you're using it on like a pre-buff situation. Um, so yeah, we're using that. And as I said before, there is some skills that you can put in, like caltrops, which you morph to razor caltrops, can go in place of things like carve, but I probably wouldn't recommend it on a single target build. And yeah, we're dark elf, so we're taking all this. But other than that, like that's pretty much what you take. As you can see, I haven't fully leveled this up, so I am missing some passives, but you would take both of these. But I'm not high enough level. But on a dummy, using this setup, the only difference is I switch out Resolving Vigor for Camo Hunter. Um, this hits from my testing 153k. It would be higher, but if you look at my champion points, I am missing like a load. So yeah, as you can see, I only have 3 things slotted. Talking of that, I can actually get this. So I have hit 153k with the CP that you saw prior to me putting this one on. So once you get all your CP or your high enough CP to have everything, this thing can hit upwards of 180k. As I said, low CP, so I'm only hitting 153, 154. But if you have all the CP, then you would definitely be able to hit upwards of 180 with the setup. Moving on to gear then. So we are using Aegis Cooler on the front bar. This is from Unhallowed Grave. You can farm this in normal, it's not too bad to get. And we are using double charged on the daggers with flame and poison. On the back bar, we have Maelstrom Greatsword. Obviously, if you have the perfected version, use that, but I don't have that currently. And we're using a disease damage enchant, and it is infused. For our headpiece, we're using Huntsman. This is Divine, and basically what this does is you bash an enemy, it makes you do more damage to them, but you do less damage to targets around. So obviously on bosses, this is great. For the body pieces, we are using a full set of perfected null archer on the body, all in Divine. And then we're using one piece slime. You can use any set here which has crit, but that's in Divine, and we're using full medium, obviously. So no archer. Obviously, I understand some people aren't going to have access to no archer so easily. So another set that you can use is actually Tideborn. Really easy. You can craft this, and it still hits hard. You will hit obviously a lot less than with no archer, but you could probably still hit like fair numbers with it. From testing, I hit around 135 to 137 using Tideball, but obviously no arco is better here if you have it. Now, jewelry, we're obviously using Aegis Cooler, but we are using Infused on all three pieces. Due to the new class mastery, you don't really need Bloodthirst, so you can go for Infused, and that way you get a lot more weapon and spell damage. So that's what I'd recommend on the jewelry. So yeah, I'm just going to put this on the screen. So if anyone needs to take a screenshot or anything like that, this is the whole build. Um, as you can see, the champion points we're using are on there. Everything's on here. If you need to screenshot it, it's right here for everyone. All right, so on to the second build. This is a trash setup. So for ads, you want to be using this, and if you have Wizard Wardrobe, I would highly recommend using that so you can switch between them really easily between the single target for bosses and this for ads. As I said, I'm low CP, so I am missing a couple of things which I will talk about when I get into it. So first things first, we are using similar stuff. So we're still using debilitate, we're still using merciless resolve, we're still using shadowy disguise. But the main thing that's changing here is we are now using power extraction as our spam ball. This is obviously for AoE. You're getting buffs from this, and it hits really hard with the sets that we're using, which I will get into soon. And secondly, instead of Killer's Blade, we're using Whirling Blades. This is an execute that's also AoE. So those are the two changes here. And we stick with Incap on the front bar for the passives. So yeah, on the back bar, I have actually switched to a bow. Things are similar here, so we're still using Shade. We've taken off Carve for poison injection. However, I will actually say that Razor Caltrops is probably better here for the AoE breach. It's just nice to have. Um, but I don't have that currently unlocked, so I've gone for poison injection. Poison injection is still fine, but Caltrops just adds more AoE to the build, and breach is nice to have. Again, we have Barb Trap here, and this is here for the same reason for the force. We're now using Arrow Barrage, and as you can see, mine is not leveled, and I have to give a shout out to someone in the guild diamond, which recommended Arrow Barrage over Endless Hell. And the reason for this is ads die really quick, so you want as much burst damage as you can, and Arrow Barrage is going to give you more burst damage than Endless Hell. Endless Hell on a boss would be better because it lasts longer and it ticks and damage longer and etc. But on ad packs where they're dying so quick now, Endless Hell, sorry, is not as good because they're probably going to be dead before it even gets to the end of that. So you want to go for Arrow Barrage, and this will just be better overall. We're still using Resolve and Vigor, and now the last thing I will say is I'm missing skills here, but you probably don't want Incap, you would probably want Shooting Star here, which is from Mage's Guild. However, as I said, I'm not leveled enough to use that, but you want to have Shooting Star here. Another option I will say is drop in the bow for a Destro staff, and you could put Wall of Elements here, and then drop poison arrow for caltrops, and then that way you could also use a destro ult on your back bar, which with combination of shadowy disguise and power extraction for burst damage buffs, like you can hit really hard with a destro ult on the back. So that is another option if you wanted to. Personally, I've gone for the bow, but as I say, destro stuff can also be used. And yet again, we are using vampire for the same reason as before. But yeah, that is the trash pack in terms of your skills. Moving on to the actual gear and going up to the top, we are using Soul Cleaver, which is from Infinite Archive. So it's not too bad to get. It did take a while to farm, but yet again, we're using double charged and same enchants, flame and poison. But this is a huge AoE set for your power extraction because it's buffing, sorry, your siphoning abilities. So that's why we're using this on the front bar. On the back bar, similar thing as before, Maelstrom Bow. Personally, I've gone for infused with weapon damage this time. Just to buff up our weapon damage for 5 seconds because it gives us a bigger burst of damage. Next, we are actually using Selene. You can use Velofis instead, but personally, I've been using Selene and it's been good. Then finally, we are using Solzans, which is from Rockgrove. Yet again, if you don't have that set, just go for Tideborn. Tideborn is honestly one of the best sets that you can use if you don't have access to certain sets. Because it increases your direct damage to monsters by 15%, and that's just literally anything you're attacking, basically. So it's always good. But basically, we're using Solzans on the body because it's giving us really nice buffs there. And then obviously front bar we're using Soul Cleaver. Yet again we're using full medium, all divine, and same thing for the jewelry as before. We have that in infused with weapon spell damage. Nothing else changes, so you're using the same class mastery, same food, etc. So you don't need to change any of that. It's just mainly the skills and the sets that change. Right, so to quickly go over the blue tree, this is what we're using. We're using Fighting Finesse instead of Backstabber just because we're going to be dealing with trash packs, so they're not always going to be facing away from you. It can be a bit funky, so I've gone for Fighting Finesse. You can keep with Backstabber if you prefer, but personally I just like having this because I feel like it's more versatile. Exploiter, again, you can change Exploiter for other things, like rifle strikes, for example. It depends on your group's uptime of off balance, but personally, I run with people that can keep this up, so Exploiter is what I use. And then we've got Master at Arms and Bite in Aura, so that's what we're using for CP. So yeah, finally, I'm just going to put this up on the screen like before. This is what we're using. It will tell you all the sets and gear, so if you want to screenshot it like before, go ahead. So yeah, that's what we're using. So now that I've gone over both the builds, I just want to talk about the Nightblade in general when it comes to trying to optimize your DPS in terms of your rotation and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into too much detail with rotation because I feel like it's kind of easier to just explain the niche things about the Nightblade than rotations as a whole. So I'm just going to go over a couple of things. So first things first, as I said with Bob Trap, you want to try and proc this before it falls off to keep 100% uptime. This means that you keep your buff throughout. Yet again, Carve is something that you want to proc again before it falls off because you want to keep it at 3 stacks. If the whole thing falls off, then it goes back down to 0, which means you have to get your stacks back up, which is a bit of an issue. Moving on to some details about your bow proc. So with your bow proc, you want to use this whenever you can. However, there is some situations where you don't want to use it instantly, and that's if your in cap is about to basically be ready to use. Incap is a buff as much as it is like a damage skill, so you want to be using this and then use your bow proc because it's buffing your damage by 20%, which is huge. And basically, where this lasts for 8 seconds, within those 8 seconds, the skills that you want to use the most are your bow proc and your spammable. It's okay to refresh like some things, like say if your stampedes falls off, you can reproc that, you can reproc your shadowy disguise especially, but you realistically want to be using your bow proc and your surprise attack as much as possible. Um, Another thing with Incap is where it's such a cheap skill, there's other aspects that you need to pay attention to, like potion usage. Um, Due to Nightblade passives, you get ultimate when you use a potion, which I believe it's 20 ultimate. I'll have to actually like find the passive. Um, but like while I'm finding it, just to explain, when you use a potion, you're getting ultimate, and when you are using that ultimate, obviously it goes back down to zero cost. So as you can see here, 22 ultimate for the catalyst. Um, so what you want to do is your incap will use up its charge regardless of what the charge is, and that will always go back down to zero. So if you have a potion ready and you also have an incap ready, you want to use your incap before you use a potion, because if you use the potion before, you're kind of wasting this 22 ultimate when you drink a potion. And 22 ultimate towards an incap is basically like one third nearly of an incap. Um, well, it's more like a quarter, but like regardless, like a quarter of an incap is huge, and it means you can get out a lot more incaps during a fight. So try to get in the habit of using a potion after you incap, not before. Um, which I know can be a little bit complicated with all the other things, but it's really important because the more incaps you have, the more damage buff you have, which means everything's going to be hitting harder for longer, and it's just good. Um, Another thing just to mention as well is with Killer's Blade, although this says 50% health, you probably don't want to start casting this until around 35% health of the enemy. Just really because your surprise attack will out damage it until around then. Um, and Killer's Blade is a little bit different to the other morph of this. I know the other morph is more so you're going to be casting it around 25%, but this you have to cast around 35. So just keep that in mind. Another thing to mention as well, and this is more to do with the trash build, power extraction gives you a buff as well. Um, so as this gives you brutality and sorcery, you can use this as a way to proc that rather than a potion. So just keep that in mind. It means you can use other pots like tri stats and stuff like that, depending on situation. So just keep that in mind with power extraction. Um, Other than that, as I said, you can swap the morph of this if you prefer the other morph, and in some situations, I would just swap it. So yeah, but what you want to think about with this build when it comes to passing is your Stampede is probably your priority skill in your back bar. Same with Barb Trap. These two give you big buffs, so these two you want to think about a lot. Shadowy Disguise, you want to use this whenever it runs out, realistically. This is probably your biggest damage buff, especially with Vampire. So this is something that you want to be using when you can. Bow proc, use when you can, and also you can use this during execute as well. Like I know in the past, like you would save it, but with all the damage buffs and stuff like that, like you might as well use this in execute, unlike in previous builds. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So these are your two main on the back bar that you want to think about, and obviously shadowy disguise. Another thing to mention as well is if there's a off balance window, which usually only lasts a few seconds, but if that happens, if you can line up an in cap with it, then you get huge damage. And another thing to think of with it is your in cap. Obviously, you want to be using spammables after it, and it's the same in a off balance window. You want to try your best to use things that are more spammable. But obviously, don't let everything fall off just to do that. Hey guys, thank you for watching the video. As I say, I will be trying to upload a bit more with other builds and stuff. I will eventually be updating my original Arcanist build for low CP, but I'm still farming some of the sets due to taking a very long break. So yeah, that'll probably be the next video, and then as I say, I'll be uploading other things as I go. I might even start throwing in a few PvP builds as well along the way, but yeah. Also, I've tried to make the video a little bit quicker in terms of like not going into too much detail with the skills and stuff. Let me know how you think about that because I know some people might prefer actually having the skills read out and like explain them a lot more. But personally, that's what I'm trying to like experiment with whether or not like I should have all the information about like exactly what every skill does or whether I should sum it up a bit more so it's a bit quicker paced rather than having to watch like a very long video. But yeah, thank you guys for watching and I'll catch you in the next video.